I feel like there's this thing called what I call real estate hazing. So when someone thinks about investing in real estate, there's only two things that currently come to mind. It's I'm going to be a landlord, or I'm going to do a fix and flip like they do on HGTV and put farmhouse sinks into ugly houses. Like that's it. That's the only two things that are presented. So you show up at the RIA meetings, that's what other people are doing. So you think that's real estate investing. And through that process, I did both. I thoroughly hated both, because the conversation that's not happening at these RIA meetings is nobody's asking you what your goals are. No one's asking you what are you currently good at? What are your weak points? And then finding a strategy that fits those. And it was purely by coincidence at one of these RIA meetings, being a Southerner, I'm outgoing, never met a stranger. I just ended up talking to someone at one of the RIA meetings, and I was in undergrad at the time. And he's like, "Oh, you're a chemistry major. You must be good with numbers." And I was like, "Yeah, pretty decent. I'm in calculus now." And he goes, "Have you ever thought of being a loan officer?" And I'm like, "No, honestly, not even on my radar." And he explained a little bit about it. And then he said, like, the magic words every college student wants to hear was, "You can work your own hours." And I'm like, done, let's do that. So I actually ended up working for, purely by accident, what would be considered now a private lender. And he was also a hard money loan broker. And this was 20 years ago, back before phones were smart. You were still faxing things. You were still driving around collecting the loan applications and walking the property with the active investors. So I got literally like a firsthand look at active investing. And, I also obviously was also collecting the checks at the lender's office. And every single month I saw people coming in, and they're like, "Oh, the contractor ran off with like my deposit. Now I got to find another one, but they're still there to pay the mortgage." They have a rental. The tenant moved in, hasn't paid anything since then, but they're still in the office paying the mortgage. And meanwhile, my boss is out on the golf course. And these guys are just like not happy, at all. They're not enjoying life. And it just kind of, the more meetings I went to, I joined some landlord groups, and the landlord groups always seemed like it was just, hopefully you collected rent on the first, and then you kept your fingers crossed that nothing broke in 30 days. And then maybe at the end of that month, you could collect your $100, $150 per door, and then just rinse and repeat to the next month. And I'm like, this seems like terribly nerve-wracking, because I'm watching a guy who's playing on the golf course and I'm collecting checks on his behalf between $700 and $2,700 a month. And I'm like, something's not right here. So that is kind of how I accidentally ended up kind of discovering being on the other side of the table. And after doing a burr and after being a landlord, I'm like, no, I'm happy on this side of the table.
So you just really did the most magnificent job of illustrating the benefits of being a passive investor, especially if you're collecting those loans right on the private lending side. But to recap it, and you're spot on, I share a very similar story. If you go to those RIAs, you go to those meetups, you network with other investors, what you will hear is, again, you could be a landlord. So rental, buy your rental property, whether it's one unit or multiple units, is still being a rental owner. Or you could flip. You can buy a property, fix it up, put some money into it, fix it up, and then sell it. And those are really the two methods that most people are aware of. And whenever you talk to people about being a real estate investor, they assume you're in one of those two buckets. So when you think about the money, the paper, and being on the paper side of it, whether it be as a loan officer or a private lender and securing that loan, that's one unique way to be passive. But then also to be a passive investor where you let someone else do that work. You put your money in, you get some equity, and you get the benefit. Talk a little bit more for the person who understands, how you broke that down, but they're still deciding whether or not they should be active. How was your time? You mentioned the time flexibility. How did that play a role in deciding what investing strategy you should take on?
Like many things in my life, being a military spouse, that was kind of a decision that was thrust upon me to deal with as I could. I'm currently sitting in my 19th address in 21 years. We have bounced around for the last 21 years. And as anybody who's familiar with the military, you don't live anywhere long enough to really get involved in an active investing role. For example, we lived somewhere for 3 months. We lived another place for 6 months. That's not really going to give you a lot of time to develop that team of boots on the ground, analyze the market, find a deal, much less flip the thing, especially during COVID with the timelines for supply chain problems. So it's just like, okay, we had to find a way to keep investing that also fit our crazy cockamamie lifestyle that we sort of have chosen. We're not the victims of our lifestyle. It's just this is what we chose to do. And one of the ramifications of that is we're probably not going to be active investors in one single market because we're not going to live in one single market. And obviously back 20 years ago before COVID, it was not overly common to be able to do distance investing. I believe one of the good things that came out of COVID for real estate is the fact that it is now much more readily acceptable to invest from a distance. There's active duty service members in Japan investing in the United States while they're overseas in Japan because they have faith in the people that are their boots on the ground. So it was just a very different mindset 20 years ago than it is now. But it was something we had to learn. We were a landlord from 3,000 miles away. Even though we had a property manager, total epic failure, never doing it again. We did manage to be capital partners on a couple burrs for people, but we weren't dealing with the supply chain problems. We weren't the ones dealing with the contractors. We weren't the ones dealing with the fact that the tile showed up in the wrong color. I don't care. I'm just there to supply the capital. Please don't do that to me. I'm not picking out tile. It's no. So it just kind of, literally just came out of the fact that we had to find something that fit into our lifestyle, and LP investing and private lending fit into our lifestyle.
There's some great lessons there, right? You recognize what your lifestyle was. You were traveling a lot. You were changing, moving from city to city. So you being boots on the ground, being the lead active investor just wasn't that ideal. And you did try it, and in those projects, it didn't work as well. And I think there's a learning curve that a lot of people don't really understand, and you talked about the plight or the drama, trauma, whatever you want to call it, that some landlords face, right? But that scenario, you would go to meetings and I would see the same thing where, again, on the first, you hope people paid. And then, after that, you just hope nothing broke. And then if nothing did break, you could take a little bit of distribution at the end of the month. And that was not the way to invest. That is not the lifestyle that many people envision when they sign up to be a real estate investor. And if that's the approach, you're probably doing something wrong. And there's got to be a way to step back and adjust. And I think it takes someone to really step back, recognize what you want to get out of a situation, and adjust your strategy accordingly. And that's exactly what you've done. And I implore a lot of other people to do something similar. Is don't necessarily just rush into being an active investor because that's what you read in the blogs and the books and everything else. There are ways to invest in real estate without becoming a landlord, without becoming a flipper. And you found a couple of strategies that work really well for you. So as you decided, hey, we're not going to be flippers. We're not going to be landlords. We're going to do more in this space here as LP investors and private lenders. What was the first step? Once you kind of made that decision, what did you do next?
It was honestly, I would say in official capacity, COVID helped a lot with that. So in March of 2020, many hard money lenders literally just shut their doors. Their particular business model relied on warehouse lines of credit that had dried up, or they relied on the secondary market to turn around and sell their loans so they could be recapitalized. So that whole system came to a just screeching halt with no forewarning. And again, being part of the military community, I knew other active investors in this community that were also active duty service members. And back when Zoom was a new thing and being out in a breakout room was a new thing, I'm going to freely admit I'm an extrovert married to an introvert. If I can get 10 words out of him at once, it's a chatty Cathy day. So I started attending these virtual meetups through Zoom very early on because I'm like, I need to talk to people because I am locked down, someone who doesn't talk. And I just happened to bump into another active investor that's in my local market. He's another active duty service member. He was telling me about, he was just talking, we were all in the breakout room talking, and he said, oh, I'm going to lose out on this deal because my lender just called me right before this meeting and said they're not going to fund the deal they're closing. And I'm like, well, tell me about the deal. You're in my local market. And it just kind of serendipitously happened that he was someone in my local market. It was a deal I was willing to fund. It was, really light rehab. And I'm like, okay, you know what? If you can give me like a week and a half, 2 weeks to kind of get everything set up, I was like, I'll fund the deal. He's like, really? I'm like, what could go wrong? Like, I'm just, people ask all the time. They're like, how did you have a plan? I'm like, I wish I had a plan. Like I gave up on plans like 15 years ago being involved with the military. And you just kind of have to take the next step with the information you have at the time, and then the next step and the next step. So that very first deal, formed an LLC, worked with an attorney, got the docs drawn up, got title insurance, all of that squared away. And we were kind of off to the races. We got our kind of monthly interest only payment, and we're watching TV, like we're watching the pandemic unfold, like the vast majority of the people in the world were at that time. And, we're watching people being out of employment. Their income had gone down. I was fortunate enough, both my spouse and I could work from home, but then we were also investing, and we were actually seeing our income coming into our household going up during this time, because we had decided to take that next step, take that next step, take that next step. And we didn't need to know, our 5-year plan, and we don't even know where we're going to be living 5 years from now. So there's no 5-year plan, but we just had to know the next couple of right steps to get us to closer to what we felt was our overall goal. And I don't think I would have pictured this, 2 years ago now. But it's worked out amazingly well, just because just little by little by little, there wasn't a plan. It was just this opportunity presented itself, and this opportunity presented itself, and this other opportunity presented itself. And then you just keep going.
No, I love it. You were there, you took advantage of the opportunities as they presented themselves, and you continue to learn. But you also had some of that knowledge from your previous experience. So you kind of understood how the private lending space worked and what was necessary to pull it together. So that kind of helped you as well to move quickly on a deal that was in your local market, that you can, get some comfort around that, as well as getting to know the individual that you were working with. On that deal, you talked about getting the title loan or the title insurance and getting some of the other paperwork together. What are some of the key steps or the key things you need to do if you're going to offer a private loan?
Absolutely, positively, all funds need to go through the closing attorney. So just the biggest scam out there in private lending for active investors is they will have people come forward and say, oh, I'll fund your deal 100%. You just need to send me $5,000 and we'll fund the deal. It'll be a 2% loan for 5 years. It's always those same numbers. I don't know if they're all taught by like the same bad guy, but they're always those numbers. And active investors fall for it. They're like, oh, this guy's going to give me $200,000 at 2% for interest only for 5 years, and it's not secured against property. And I'm like, no, nobody's doing that. I'm sorry. So making sure that money only exchanges hands through the closing table. And then at that closing table will be when they sign the legal instrument for a promissory note, the lien, whether it's a mortgage or deed of trust, depending on the state. There's going to be hazard insurance. So you need to make sure that there's adequate hazard insurance that the borrower has obtained, and that you are on there as the mortgagee. So in case the place burns down, you're made aware. If there's a claim, you're made aware. If it's canceled, you're made aware. And then obviously it's going to have clear and marketable title if it's going through a title insurance company, and you're going to require a lender's title policy. So the funny thing about private lending is it's very collaborative, because legally you can't do it all on your own. You're not doing the title search. You're not a hazard insurance broker. There's lots of people that are kind of on your side to protect your investment. And those protections are actually paid for by your borrower. So I love it.
No, it's great information right there. You talked about, first of all, make sure everything financially, all transactions happen at the closing table. Do not pay somebody up front. It's likely a scam if you do that. So make sure, whichever side of the table you're on, make sure everything happens at the closing table. You have all your partners there. Make sure you get your hazard insurance. Make sure you get your title insurance, get all these different attorneys to make sure everything is situated the right way. And then you also mentioned that you want a lender's title policy to make sure you are fully protected as the private lender. I know you now work with a lot of other people and help them learn how to invest or how to lend their money as well in these kind of deals. You got a couple of groups. Talk to us about some of those groups and what sparked you to want to educate other people in this space.
So again, it goes back to COVID. A couple months in, I was like, oh, let's go find other people doing private lending. Bigger Pockets talks about it, and just kind of in passing, they'll say, go find a private lender to fund your deals. I'm like, okay, great. That must mean there's more of me out there. There's got to be more of me. people, I keep hearing about it and I just can't find the people. Like I joke now that we take the private part of private lending very seriously because we are hide and seek champions. But every real estate group I went to join on Facebook, again, looking for community, looking for people to talk to, everything that had something to do with either private lending, hard money lending, lending in general, was basically a group for scams and spam. There wasn't anything networking related. There wasn't anything education related. There was no way to talk to other people doing this. And then, I was talking to a friend of mine that's stationed here and they're like, why don't you start a group? And I'm like, dude, I don't know anything about running a group. I spent 8 years in college. None of them were in digital marketing or finance or like community management. I don't know anything. He's like, just start a group. And he dared me. And of course I had to take him up on the dare because that's just who I am. And then like a week later, there were like 100 people in the group. I was like, oh crap, now I got to do something. And then a couple months later, there's 1,000 people in the group. I'm like, well, I guess we're doing it. And now there's close to 7,000 people. The group's only about a year and a half old. Wow. And I was like, well, it's become a thing. And I now have friends that I've met through this group. We get together, twice a year now as a in-person mastermind, now that we can do that because COVID restrictions have lifted a little. And like I've genuinely made friends all over the country that are doing the same exact thing I am. And it started because of a group that I got dared to do.
I love it. That's great to hear. And I just love that you just realized something was needed. You were searching for it. You couldn't find those people. In your conversations with others, you finally got told, why don't you just start it? You hesitated, you pushed back. And that's the natural thing for most of us, right? Is there's something there. Someone gives you an option, we push back on it, and then you maybe think about it, or maybe you get pushed a little harder. You decide to do it. And here you are with the Facebook group with over 7,000 members that didn't even exist until you created it. So kudos to you for going ahead and launching that and helping so many other people learn how to invest privately. Now that group there, that's private lending lessons on Facebook. That's the Facebook group. And then if folks want to connect with you on LinkedIn, your LinkedIn handle is invest passively to live actively. And the 2 is the number 2, invest passively to live actively. And you're helping so many other people learn how to invest in private lending and really understanding what the mechanics are and all those different things. And in fact, you've got a book that you've got coming out, right? You just wrote a book. Talk to me about this book.
Yes. So we have a book coming out, ironically, through Bigger Pockets. I'd been giving them a hard time for about 18 months on various other interviews. Like Bigger Pockets doesn't talk about private lending, which is why I had to start the group. And then Bigger Pockets is like, oh, I guess we'll publish a book now about private lending. So it was a very quick process. People are like, oh, it's so hard to write a book. And I'm like, honestly, it's going to sound really stupid, but this was done in like 2 weeks. So again, more of like with this networking, a friend of mine that's in Japan was in the United States for the first time in about 2 years, thanks to travel restrictions being lifted. And he was going up to be in Maryland and I'm in Virginia. I'm like, dude, we got to meet in person. Like we are so close. We got to go meet in person. He was only going to be in town for like a week. So he's like, all right, I'm getting a bunch of people together, have breakfast so I can kind of meet everybody I want to meet while I'm out here. Cause we'd been talking over Zoom for 2 years at this point. So I drove up there and on the way up there, I got bypassed off the interstate and onto these little back roads because of some major accident. And so I'm just driving along and like, it just suddenly like hit me like a ton of bricks. And I don't know how to explain it other than like, it was like, I have to write a book. And then like, it didn't even feel like I had to write it. It was almost like it was already done. And I don't know how to explain that to people, but it was like, it was done. It was like, I have a book. And I literally had to break out my voice recorder on my app on my phone. And you can hear me like very excitedly talking about this book that's already done. And then I'm just like, what kind of crazy thing is this? And then I ended up stuck in traffic on this Bumsville Road in Maryland. And I'm a big dinosaur fan. And next to me, I look over and there's this 20-foot statue of this random dinosaur and a dinosaur egg. Like I'm stuck in front of this junk store in some traffic jam in the middle of nowhere, Maryland. And I'm like, well, that's a sign. So I guess we're doing the book. So I went and I spent the night, had breakfast with him the next morning, drove back to Virginia the next day. And I literally just kind of sat down and I'm like, this is it. This is going to be what it is. And just kind of spent 2 weeks cranking out the vast majority of it. I got my co-author involved, Beth Johnson, and she's very good with systems. So we kind of cleaned it up and made it an actual system. So it was very easy to kind of digest. for someone that doesn't have that lending background like both of us came from. And literally, it was just, I don't want to say it was necessarily an easy project, but it was just like, it was already done when I started and I knew that. And I think that just kind of gave me the impetus to like, it's already done. I might as well finish it.
When you say done, you mean that you pretty much knew the words and the content of what you wanted to say. It was just a matter of putting it out of your head and putting it on a paper. Is that what you mean?
No, I mean, literally, I had the feeling like it was just done. There's this book called The Secret. They made a great movie about it too. The movie's awesome because it's based in Louisiana. And there's this feeling like you tell the universe, like you imagine the genie in Aladdin, you tell the universe what you want. And then the universe has nothing but like, okay, we got to give it to you. You asked for it. Here you go. And I had actually read that book about a year ago, before this actually happened. And I'm like, I wonder if that's what it was. Like, it was just one of those things where it's just like, you got everything downloaded into you, all the experiences there, you just haven't done it yet. And it literally felt like it was already done. It was just the craziest thing I've ever had happen to me was just that. And then seeing the dinosaur. And I'm like, all right, any doubt I had, dinosaurs there, so I'm not a crazy person. I swear it was just a very weird experience for me.
So then actually writing the book, you said that took about, 2 weeks. You had that epiphany moment, right? So everything is clear. It's already inside of you. And did it just flow out from there? Or how did you actually get the actual manuscript complete?
Oh yeah, no, it was just sitting on my back porch. I back up to woods. Thank God for COVID because I spent a lot of time in this house now. And just sat out on my back porch and just kind of started pecking away at it. Obviously being a professor for the last 10, 15 years, like it's not difficult for me to sit down and kind of break down complex topics and, get an order and a flow to things. So I'd literally just bang out, 8,000-9,000 words in a day and, come back the next day and just, it wasn't a chore. I think that's what most people like, oh, I got to get this next chapter done. It was like, no, okay, we're going to do this. And I think that speaks a lot to mindset. Mindset's big in real estate. And I don't think that gets talked about enough, that you really have to have the mindset like you're going to be successful. You're going to find that deal. You're going to do this. You're going to generate the income. You're going to get the property stabilized, whatever that is. And if you go in there kind of just, I don't know, I don't really want to do this, you're going to fail. You have to go in and go, I'm doing this. I've done this. It's already happened. It's predetermined. Let's go.
I love it. Well, that book I know is coming out later this year. It should be out in August. So we'll have to update the link when that's ready to go. But we'll make sure it'll be available on Bigger Pockets as well. So we'll put kind of the Bigger Pockets publishing link on here. And then hopefully when that book's ready, we'll make sure we give this another bump and another plug. We're excited to see that book when it's ready to come live. I want to ask you about investing, right? So we've talked a lot about private lending and the way you approach that and gave us some great tips to make sure we protect ourselves whenever we're doing a private loan. But you also do some LP investments in multifamily syndications and other deals. I'm just curious, how do you decide how to build your portfolio? Do you have different buckets of money that you pull? Do you have, one deal where you look at and say, hey, we'll do these kind of deals with this bucket? But just walk me through your process a little bit there.
Yeah, it was actually another accident. I was talking to my CPA and he's like, well, private lending doesn't count as an active investment to manage to be a real estate professional for the IRS. Obviously, they've never been a private lender, but okay. So he's like, you need to buy a rental. And I'm like, no, over my dead body. No, it's not happening. And so we kind of went back and forth and, and he's like, well, you could invest in a syndication where you're kind of basically a part owner, but you don't have to deal with the tenants, the toilets, and the trash. And I'm like, I'm listening. What do you got? And, he kind of explained the process. Again, me being the person I am, I went to go find other people that were doing it. I found a really great book about it, kind of digested the book. And I'm like, yeah, this makes sense because I don't want to make the decisions about what color the cabinets need to be in an apartment. I just don't. That's not me. So it really kind of became a part of the thing where I needed to have something on the equity side of the table, but I was unwilling to be a landlord. I was unwilling to manage a fix and flip, but this let me be on the equity side of the table. So I was getting my tax depreciation, which we needed. I was getting the upside, obviously the equity multiple, multifamily's gone crazy as cap rates have compressed over the last 2 years. So the other thing it allowed me to do that I was concerned about is private lending tends to be very, very localized. Like most private lenders are going to lend in maybe a couple markets, usually within the same state. So the money we were investing was all here in Virginia. It also offered a way for me to invest in other markets outside of my current one just for diversification purposes. So that was another benefit that we got from it.
No, it makes a lot of sense there. And do you use the same, I shouldn't say same, but do you use this like different accounts, or do you have just kind of one account that you use for all your investing? Because I know some folks like to maybe use retirement funds to invest in certain types of deals, and then maybe they use cash for other deals, but do you use anything like that?
No, we being young and stupid, we never set aside retirement money. And I'm actually kind of happy we did, because being active duty military, my spouse has been in for 22 years now. So at any point he could walk away and, we would be able to live on his retirement paycheck alone. That's always been our plan. It's like, that was our retirement. But I also didn't understand the point of having an account I couldn't touch until I was in my middle 60s, which was like, no, I don't think so. Like, I tend to be a little bossy. So I'm like, no, it's my money. I'm going to do what I want to do with it, no matter what my age is. So we never got into the retirement thing. We did do the whole life insurance policy thing. So we have those building. We plan on investing with those as soon as it's up high enough to actually get into a deal, whether that's private lending or being an LP syndication. But really, it just kind of comes. We have our lending business. It has its own bank account, its own thing. It's a business. And then our LP stuff is just purely in our name as individuals. So that would just come from, whatever savings or other equity or whatever we happen to have in other properties or securities.
If someone is considering investing passively in a deal, either as a private lender or as an LP, what advice would you give them to help them make the right decision for themselves?
Really, really know what your goals are. Because I see it a lot, especially with the current market. There's a lot of investors that are going after these multifamily deals that maybe need some really heavy stabilization. It's got very low occupancy. It's got a lot of deferred maintenance. But then they're going and telling the investors, oh, we're going to go in, we're going to bump rents $200 a month. It's going to be this great cash flow. And I'm like, yeah, but it's going to take you 2 years to get there, because you got to turn 96 units during COVID. Like, this ain't happening in the first 2 years. But not saying they're trying to be deceptive, but that's what they're saying. It's, oh, you'll get this, this passive cash flow through distributions quarterly. I'm like, yeah, but the cash flow you're telling us is coming isn't going to be here for 2 years. So, again, for better or worse, if you're a cash flow investor, then look for deals that are currently cash flowing, maybe mostly stabilized. Maybe they just need to do some rubs, whatever that happens to be. But if you're not concerned about the monthly cash flow, maybe you have enough coming in, you can then focus on deals that maybe have that higher equity multiple. Maybe you won't get a distribution for the first year or two because it's a development, or it's being turned from, a condos to apartments. Whatever that problem is, where it's not going to cash flow for a few years, but you're going to look at a high equity multiple, maybe like it's a development project. But know that going in, know that you are either a cash flow investor or what I would consider an appreciation investor. Do you want a big pot of money 2-3 years from now, or do you want that monthly or quarterly distribution to live off of? And I think that alone will really help narrow down the opportunities if you just know that from day one. Like, I am a cash flow investor. If this thing doesn't cash flow from day one, I'm not to say it's a bad deal. It's just not the deal for me.
No, great insights right there. And I think if that's something that you are thinking about right now, is whether or not you want to be a private lender or if you want to invest as an LP, play that back, because Alex just gives some really great insights to help you make that decision for yourself. You've got to start with your goals, but then also understand the real questions and the real implications of the deals. Many of the syndication deals, some are cash flow focused, but some may not pay out for a couple of years. But then on the private lending side, the way you structure that, you're typically going to be getting more of a consistent check, assuming you do all your vetting and all that kind of stuff as well. So just make sure you understand those things going into the deal. Alex, we are going to transition to our round of insights. First question for you. Give me a failure or an apparent failure that set you up for later success.
Oh man, there's been so many. I would say the major failure we had was having a long-term rental 3,000 miles away. We were accidental landlords. The Navy was supposed to send us to one base a couple hours away. They ended up sending us literally to the exact opposite diagonal part of the country. So we went from Florida to Whidbey Island in Washington State, kind of at the last minute. And we just ended up accidental landlords. I hired a property management company that, again, I knew through these RIA groups, and they just basically let whoever the first person applied get into the property, and they just destroyed it. And that had been our personal home. So you had that emotional attachment to it as well. And it was just every time our cell phone rang, it was just like, what are we doing now? Like, what's the problem? And it was just that honestly solidified, like, at the time I was like, I don't want to invest in real estate anymore. Like, this is not me. I for my own mental brain damage, I can't do this anymore. And we actually stepped away from it for a few years, just because even though I knew what I knew, I didn't consider private lending a way of investing. I was just like, oh yeah, I've got some extra money, we'll make that. That's kind of fun. It's a fun little thing I'll do every so often. But again, all I knew as real estate investing was being a landlord and being fix and flip. We had tried both of those to not any success. And I was just like, okay, we're just not going to invest in real estate.
Yeah. Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
Oh, honestly, for the LP investors, I got to give a shout out to Brian Burke, The Hands-Off Investor, the book. I've digested, I've read it, I've taught other people about it. Like, honestly, he's come to talk to my group. I think it's what I would call the Bible of LP investing. There's a lot of really great information. So if somebody's starting from ground zero, you don't even know what a syndication is, all the way up to if you are more advanced and you've invested in a few deals, but you just kind of want to refine your process and learn a little bit more about the mechanics of it. Fantastic book.
Excellent. All right. So we're going to pause you for a second. This is a note from my editor. I'm going to ask the next question. Take her answer and put it to what I'm about to ask. And then I'm going to ask the question I did ask a second time. Give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year. Oh,
the book I've recommended and gifted the most is actually The Four Agreements. It's kind of a self-development book, not taking things. It just gave me a completely different way to kind of view the world around me. And it honestly just gave me kind of a sense of inner peace, where I have this foundation now where I don't have to go out there and prove anything to anybody. Like, I don't have to worry about, does everybody like me? What is their impression of me? Like, it's not that I don't care, but it's just like, it's my impression of myself that matters. So I've actually mailed that book to like 4 people in the last 6 months. I love that book.
Awesome. All right. So the question I asked before was, give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend.
The Hands-Off Investor. It comes as an ebook.
Got it. All right. We're going to stick with that. All right, editor, ignore all of my notes. All right. Just cut it out. Let's keep it clean.
It is a really good book.
We're going to keep both books and we're just going to move on. It's all good. All right, Alex, give me a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals.
I have this fantastic little app on my phone, and it brings up every morning and evening. Like, it asks me 3 questions. What am I grateful for? What did I accomplish today to get closer to my goal? And who am I going to help, tomorrow? Usually this is what the nighttime asks. Because I come from a place of like service to others. I feel like if you're going to be successful, if you have the drive and you have the grit, you can make yourself successful. But I think the people that are ultimately very successful and very happy are those that bring others along for the ride. So being very conscious about not only what your goals are, but who can you help on your path, you're going to raise up your community, whether it's the military community, your local community, some subculture you belong to. You're going to become more prosperous when you make others around you prosperous. So that I kind of look at the network as your net worth sentence backwards. So if I can help other people, that's going to increase my net worth as well.
What's the name of the app?
Day One.
Yeah, I love Day One.
Yeah.
Yep. No, it's Day One. I remember that. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Give me your number one insight for passive investing.
It's going to be don't fall underneath the fallacy thinking that you're a passive investor, so you have no choice. I think that's what a lot of people, why they initially want to be active investors, is they feel like they need to have that control. And in my case, I still feel like I have a ton of control. Like, just for an example, I can choose, which operator I want to invest with. I can choose what state I want to invest in. I can choose what type of projects I want to invest in. It's 100% my choice. The control I'm giving up is the stuff that doesn't really matter to me. Like, I don't want to manage tenants. I don't want to keep track of the KPIs for, an asset manager. I don't want to figure out what color to paint the walls. 100% you can do that. I'm 100% okay with giving up that control. So I think just don't fall into the fallacy that just because you're a passive investor doesn't mean you don't have control of things, of the deal. You actually do. I mean, part of that PPM and the subscription agreement, the operating agreement actually gives you the outline, the legal outline of the control you have as an LP investor.
Oh, great insight right there. All right. Give me your favorite place to grab a bite to eat. Now, we're going to say in Virginia, but you've traveled so much, moved so many times that I'm not sure if you found a place you love yet in Virginia. So have you found that place? And if so, give us your favorite place there.
I have, but I will caveat this with it was my favorite place in Florida where we lived before this. And they ended up opening up a franchise in Virginia because it's a military, owned business. They support the military. So they were in Jacksonville, Florida when we lived there. It's a place called Metro Diner. And being a Southern person, it's a Southern kitchen. And I'm just like, oh, I was in heaven. I will kid you not. I drive down to Florida to go visit friends. And I'm like, we're going to Metro Diner. I don't care. Like, I'm happy to see you, but I'm going to Metro Diner. And then somebody told me they're putting one here. And I was like ecstatic.
I love it. Love it. Metro Diner. So we'll make sure you check that out, especially in your military towns. Alex, loved our conversation. You gave us great insights from one, recognizing that there's more to being a real estate investor than being a rehabber or being a landlord. And as you think about those options, there's certainly passive investing opportunities as a limited partner in some of these multifamily deals or other kind of deals. But you can also be a private lender. And there's a lot of opportunities to be a private lender. You gave us great insights on what those steps are. And for anyone who wants to learn more, they can join your Facebook group. That is Private Lending Lessons is the Facebook group. And they can also connect with you, which is Invest Passively to Live Actively. That's on LinkedIn as well. So make sure you reach out to Alex if you do have more interest in that. And we cannot wait to see your book once that's live and ready to go out to the world later this year in 2022. I just want to thank you again for coming on Multifamily Insights and being a great guest today.
Thank you for having me. I had a great time.